Let me take time out to say a very special good afternoon to you. This is Hard Talk Power 102 Digital Monday. Today, our host is Karen Nunez Tesheira. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us. Let me say welcome to the program. And of course, Karen has a very special guest that will be joining us in a very short. So, good afternoon, Karen.
Good afternoon, David. Good afternoon to all of your viewers from all over the world. It's really a pleasure to be with you again on a. You always talk about Monday being a blues. You know, they have a song that they made about Mondays not being good, but for me, Mondays is something I look forward to because I know I'm going to be doing this program, and I'm going to be doing it with someone that I've gotten very close to in terms of giving support, discussion and that is, of course, none other than David McIntyre, Daddy Mac. And yes, we have a fantastic guest with us this evening. And I say that sincerely to you, listeners, to whom all this show is really about you. And I oftentimes learn a lot myself. I can assure you about that. But one of the things that I had wanted to do, I'm just hoping you'll let me know when he'll be here.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I did want was I wanted him to come back on for the first show of the new year. But we did property tax, and since I was the property tax lady, I didn't think it was too a remiss for us not to focus on it. And I think hopefully it went well, and we all, including myself, when you're challenged, you benefit from those discussions. So today we have, maybe I should ask David, as he always does, to give you the numbers, but we also know that some of you may be shy of whatever reason to actually call, but we want you to call. We love you to call. You may not think so, because I know I speak a lot. Yes, you don't have to tell me. I've been told that since I'm a child. But that is in no way an indication that I don't want to hear what you have to say, because I learn from you. And one of the things you can still do, but we want you to come on, because on other, I do have people calling in, and whether good, bad, or indifferent, and they ask you questions that are helpful to you and helpful to the audience. So you can do what you also do is send your queries, your things to David McIntyre, and then he can relay to us. But the better thing is to hear your voice, So I let David, first of all, there he is, Dr. Ram. I was
Yes.
kind of killing time to wait until you came on. But
Yes, sorry.
I'm going to ask nevertheless, good afternoon, Dr. Ram,
Good
and I'm going to
afternoon.
still do the formal introduction to our listeners, those who had joined us previously and tremendously enjoyed the show. I, for one, I mean, I thought that explanation that you gave about purchasing power parity. I mean, that was like I could have been in a classroom, and and I have a eureka moment, I said,
All right.
oh. And that, of course, another thing. So, I didn't forget what you said with LNG. That was a really, really kind of another aha moment. I had never even thought about it. So,
Mm.
before we go on further and I introduce you formally, I just asked David, if you don't mind, just to put up the numbers, and then I will do the formal introduction. And thank you so much for joining us again.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
those
Thank you,
numbers
Karen.
are 222-8255, 222-8255, 612-8255, 612-8255, and 866-525-1099. That's our toll-free number, 866-525-1099. You can also send your messages via the comments section of the Facebook, and we'll read out your comments as we go along.
Yes, and comments and questions, of course. So let me do the formal introduction again, some of which Dr. Ram had to update me. So I did some updating myself, Dr. Ram. I did a little updating. I don't
All
know if I
right.
did enough, but I tried. But so we
Okay.
start from the beginning. You were the director of the Caribbean Development Bank. And during that period of time, you did a number of consultancy projects with internationally recognized entities, including the International Labour Organization, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. so that you have certainly made a name for yourself. And obviously, being asked to do consultancy projects or be part of it says a lot, because they just don't ask any and anyone to do that. But you have moved on and you are now have your own advisory services, which is, I guess, was your ultimate goal, and understandably so, because I too had been in academia, and I know in academia, I mean, at the end of the day, all that knowledge that you have can not only benefit the students that you teach, but can benefit the region in which you live in a real way. So I did go up and see, by perchance, Turks and Caicos. I know you had mentioned it on the last occasion, but uh,
Yes.
but you are the head of the Premier Delivery Unit that was set up at the end November 2022 by the Premier. And one of the things he said when he announced the start of this new unit was that it was not an easy task. It wasn't like a fly by night. We just pull together anybody and say, come on board. I believe he said it took them 3 months to make sure they got the right mix of people, and you are heading up that unit. So I just want to know that I did update on that. And,
Okay.
and you are Justin Ram Advisory Services, so that I know you don't limit yourself to the Turks and Caicos, because I also remember, yes, I do remember what you say, because it did impact me, and I was genuine about that. I don't know why some things, I don't know, it escapes you, and then somebody says something, and you say, but that's true. When you said that Curacao doesn't even have oil, but they have a refinery, and so all this talk about how much barrels per day and how much non-barrels per day and all of that really is not as important as the skill set and whatever else that goes into it. But
Yes.
before I ask you to take the stage, and I'm going to let you take the stage and educate us as you always do, I'm going to start with unemployment. Now, the reason I'm starting with unemployment, I know we had a number of, there's so many topics that we couldn't cover. But one of the reasons why I'm going back to unemployment, and then I would just ask you some questions which you'll answer when you speak, is because in the Sunday Express, in the opinion page, opinions, this Sunday Express, actually, they had as a headline, I was kind of surprised at the
Mm.
unemployment puzzle. And I think before, maybe not with your good self, but with someone else, I had mentioned if the unemployment level, as the central bank is reporting, and so is CSO, is 3.6, 3.7%. And even the article in the paper said it, and I had known that even at the very beginning. 5% is considered full employment, because there are some people who will, shall not, cannot work for whatever reason. So to reach 3.6 or 3.7%, and from what they reported, thousands of people turned up for that 300 jobs in to be police recruits. And then they reminded us of the whole thing with the cruise ship, and they reminded us again of the one position for prison officer and cars going around the bend. So that's why they call it a puzzle, because they're saying if in fact that were the case, and you
Mhm.
reach 2.7% and 5% is full employment, why are we seeing this? Now, they did say, to be fair, and they did say maybe it's a mismatch. Maybe the qualifications to be in the police services are higher than other jobs. But nonetheless, they found that among the youth, we have a very high unemployment level among the youth. I think the lowest they ever reached was 8% in 2014. And if you are where we are, it's really worrying. So I am going to ask you to explain, because I don't think we really went into too much, labor force participation rate. But I really want to ask you your opinion on what's the purpose of employment. Because I mean, I know it sounds like a foolish question on the face of it, but if employment is in order to be able to, not everybody's going to be wealthy, so not everybody's going to live in a castle and all of that, right? We understand that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
you have UNDP, Sustainable Development Goals, and so on. And there are going to be people who you might say are poor, but is there a point at which you say that the unemployment figures are really not reflective of the reality of the poverty? Because, by the way, a young girl just called me yesterday out of the blue. I don't know how she got my number. And she said, but she had been retrenched. I won't call the name of the major company, and it was going on around. It's something that's. And she said she's applied all over the place. So, what I'm really asking you is there a connection or correlation between poverty, living wage, labor force participation rate, and of course that Gini coefficient from a governmental, because that's what you're doing, you're advising from a government point of view, and why 3.7 sounds puzzling even to the Express. So if I'll give you the floor now.
Right. Okay, Karen, thanks very much. I just wondered, are you hearing me okay?
Very well.
Very well. Okay, so thanks again for having me on, and thank you for the introduction. Well, when it comes to there of course is a puzzle when it comes to the unemployment rate in Trinidad and Tobago, because we all know that the economy has not really experienced any sort of robust economic growth for quite some time. I would say for maybe a decade or so. The country has not experienced robust, strong, really real GDP growth. And in fact, as you know, with the onslaught of the pandemic, we had a significant decline in GDP, and that would have exacerbated any sort of unemployment numbers. Now, what tends to happen, I think your audience members need to understand, is that when we speak about the total labor force, we are speaking about people who are actively seeking jobs. Yes, so they're actively seeking jobs, or they actually have a job. Okay. Now, what tends to happen is that you would say that when you combine both of those, that would make up of your total labor force. What happens eventually in an economy that is not growing and where people become disenfranchised or disenchanted is that they drop out of the labor force, right? So if somebody cannot find a job, they say, well, you know what, this is not for me. I am no longer willing to be counted amongst the labor force because I just can't find a job. And you found this phenomenon happening in even advanced economies after the great financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. If you remember, during Barack Obama's years as president of the US, labor force participation rates were very low because many people could not find jobs. They simply fell out of the labor market. And I suspect that this is what is happening. And in fact, I don't suspect it. In fact, it is true that many people have simply dropped out of the labor force and therefore are no longer counted as unemployed. Okay? So if they were still in the labor force, then perhaps, and I would say not perhaps, I would say truly, the unemployment rate would be a lot higher than the 3.6% or 3.7% that the CSO is reporting right now. So what is happening here is that simply people have fallen out of the labor force and they don't have jobs to find. Now, what does that mean for the economy as a whole? It means, therefore, that your economic potential, the amount that your economy, the size of the economy, is a lot less because you now have a lot of people who are not doing anything and are now idle. And there's also the problem associated with that is that it can also then lead to antisocial behavior, of which the greatest manifestation of that is crime. And it could lead to violent crime, but people still need to eat. It could mean that household members who are working now have a higher dependency ratio. So if you think about it, you have a household where one or two members are working, and then you have other people who should be working, but they cannot find work. Their incomes now have to support these individuals. And that is why when we look at unemployment rate, any good economist will also look at the labor force participation rate. You would also look at what we also refer to as underemployment. And you want to look at, and you mentioned the whole idea of living wage. I have a very, very deep knowledge of a living wage because I was one of the first economists to calculate that for London when I used to work for the mayor of London. And the living wage in London was something that we had to calculate based on a number of metrics that we knew that people needed to afford. So in fact, the national minimum wage at the time in the UK was much lower than the London living wage, simply because the cost of living in London was higher. And what tended to happen was that we then went on a campaign to say this is what employers need to start paying their employees. And the majority of employers in London began paying the living wage and started to ignore the national minimum wage. And we also tried to encourage the national government at the time to do a national living wage as well, rather than just having a simple minimum wage as it were. So these are really other important factors and indicators that all commentators on the economy need to look at when looking at unemployment and overall employment and what it really means. Now, you also touched on a very important topic that is dear to my heart, which is youth unemployment. Now, I would be very surprised if youth unemployment in Trinidad and Tobago is as low as 8%.
No, it was 8% in 2014, the lowest it ever was. But right now it's in the, because I looked it up, I went to the, sorry, I should have said, and my apologies, Dr. Ram, you see, I got so excited about having you here. I forgot to mention your professional qualifications, ending with your PhD from the London School of Economics and Political Science, where people like Bill Clinton and former President of the United States, so it's top of the top. And you did your master's also at one of the top universities in United Kingdom, and you did your first degree at UE St. Augustine. So I forgot to mention you. And you also did, which I was curious, just a little curious, that you did a postgraduate in environmental, I think it's something to do with environment at University of California, Berkeley, which everybody knows is one of the top universities. So my apologies for excluding, and you are such a polite gentleman. By the way, I didn't just walk off the road. My essays.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, but no, they didn't say that. But I looked it up, and what they said, I tried to be, I tried to, as much as possible, prepare for someone like your good self. And I'm going to ask you still a lot of questions around that. He said the labor force participation rate dropped from 2010 to, from under 50% to 36% in 2022. Now, they did recognize that the pandemic would have impacted it, but they said, nevertheless, this is from the monetary report from the central bank. They said, however, it continued, the downward trend has been continuing, with the labor force participation rising slightly from 55% in 2022. It is not 56%. Well, maybe when you round it off, it is, because I went to CSO and the 55.6. But they did say that among the unemployment rate for the 15 to 24 never came close to 3.7%. And it also said it is high. It is a very high unemployment rate. And so I'm trying to see the actual number, but I'm not seeing it. But it is high. It is high.
Yes. So I have the numbers. Well, I have up until Q1 2022. Maybe they have later than that. But when I looked at it, the overall participation rate for the entire labor force was 55.2%, which is very, very low. So you can, your listeners can think that we have almost 45% of those who should be working, maybe not even participating in the labor force. And that tells you have a lot of missed economic potential. And you think about it, it means that the economy could be considerably larger. And policy has to think about how you attract more and more people into the labor market. Now, when I looked at the numbers by gender, that is what actually scared me the most, Karen, because male participation in the labor force is actually at around 66%, but female participation is actually down to 45.4%. Now, that is very, very, very worrying. And there is no way in this day and age in 2024 that you can consider moving your economy forward if you have so many women unemployed or who are not really interested in working. Why is that? Because we all know when we look at education data as well, it is women who have more qualifications than men now. So where are those women who are highly qualified if they are not working? Are they now leaving our shores in droves, or have just given up because they are not able to find jobs? And one of the things we know is that women find it much more difficult to find work, particularly when they have to raise children. And so there are a number of policies that this is not rocket science. This has been done everywhere that we all know we need to try to look at and put in place to raise the labor force participation rate. And I would say the focus should be for us to look at raising female labor force participation rates, because if I dare so to your listeners, women are a lot more productive than men.
What does that mean?
And
Somebody like that. What does that mean? And I can tell you which you would like that. But I don't
right,
believe. I do
yes,
believe
right,
one thing. I do believe it's not anything in DNA. It's just how things. It's what is happening in the world and the world we're living in. But I wanted to say this before you go ahead on the woman point. I was very very curious. I have been trying to find the court drug report for the longest while, and for some reason I couldn't. But suddenly it popped up. And what was very interesting, that was Dulce's time, and they did a report on it. But I think it was I don't want to say it's in 1980s, 1990s. I didn't go back to look. But curiously, one of the things they mentioned in the report, which goes to what you're talking about, is and another point I want to make too, as I'm saying that, is that they said that in the manufacturing sector, you really can't have the 24 3 shifts going, because the crime rate is so high that women are afraid to go out after dark. They said that. And they said that is the crime rate. And with women getting raped, being exposed, in those kinds of jobs. And also the fact that, of course, they're saying, well, the firms have to employ security firms, security staff. But what they were saying is that I think that might affect women working, because a lot of jobs are maybe in that area. Another thing I wanted to mention, which came out of the Central Bank report. I think you know what it is that disturbed me about the Central Bank report. I have to tell you, I don't know if you read the monetary report for November, but I think what disturbed me, Mrs. Intyre has to keep an even keel and a measured tone.
yeah,
But it's not as if you just set out a set of data, in my respectful opinion, without some analysis of it. And what was noteworthy to me was when they were looking at the 3.7% that we mentioned, and he never mentioned the 5%, by the way. But what he did say was where the employment was coming from. And nearly 8,000 of the persons who joined the labor force, guess where it is? CPEP and URP, 7,700.
wow,
Yeah.
okay,
So, and they did say, when they
yes,
look at the effect of the minimum wage, which I wanted to talk about inflation by itself. But he did say, of course, there are most of the persons in those programs are paid the minimum wage. But look at what I've asked other people, and I'm subject to be corrected. Yes, maybe they work every day, but they make work only 4 hours out of 8 hours. You
right,
see,
yes,
that is not going to, that can't take care of anybody. So they almost artificially bumped up, in my respectful opinion, the labor force numbers so that they could reach to that number, because 8,000 people, or 7,700 to be exact, was what they said was increased, and it is specifically CPAP and URP. They did say that. So
right,
I do know that would have
yeah,
a
that's
bearing.
yeah, that's one of the bugbears that I have with not only the Trinidad and Tobago economy, but with quite a few Caribbean economies, whereby because we're not creating the jobs that are productive and that can pay an adequate wage that would allow you to afford the basics in life. What then happens is that there's this unfortunate spiral of where governments are then forced to spend money to help make things affordable. Hence the reason why we spend so much on transfers and subsidies. Now, if you think about it, it is not sustainable at all. And we are better off if we start from today, focusing on what is required, one, to build good human capital. So, we probably can't speak about that now, but that means improving and reforming our education system, reforming our healthcare system, reforming our childcare system, reforming early childhood education, and then reforming the labor market. Because ultimately, that is what we need to be moving towards, because eventually we can't afford these very large transfers and subsidies that governments feel that they have to spend long. And Karen, it is this sort of a spiral that we are in, whereby whenever you speak about any sort of economic program in Trinidad and Tobago, we have become accustomed to speaking about the benefits of those programs in terms of government revenues. Why is that? Because we all know that our governments require these monies to sustain people who can't find real jobs. And we need to switch this whole economic paradigm that we have on its head and start looking at economic development from the point of view of where we are targeting households and individuals so that they get sustainable, well-paid jobs so that they can afford the things that they need to without now having to always revert to government assistance to afford the basic things. Because eventually we're not going to be able to support and afford these transfers and subsidies.
I want to say on that, and that might be the cynic in me, and that may be because, I know it is, I don't think it is without any value. I'm not saying totally, but when you're in government, you certainly don't want your macroeconomic indicators, especially in a difficult time with the energy being what we still. And I have a whole set of data coming from the central bank, which so surprised me. I said, well, after you write that, you don't realize we're in real trouble. Or you could be saying those things and everything else you say seem to, go contrary to what you're saying. I may be a cynic and I may be speaking from having seen it from that kind of lens. They know it doesn't look good. If your energy, you don't have the natural gas, the petrochemical industries. I have the figures, and they did have it in the monetary report. They did put it. It was shocking actually. And I did remember what you said about LNG, and I never thought about it. It's like taking your cocoa and sending it to England for them to make Cadbury, and then you're buying it back. But anyhow, you didn't say that. I said that, okay?
Yeah.
But you were trying to say we're not making the most of the value added of what we have. But from a government's point of view, any government, people look at those indicators. And in my respectful opinion, if they were really serious about helping those persons, first of all, they'll create more entrepreneurial opportunities for them to take them out of the poverty. But instead, they stay there so that let's just say, and that's just my opinion. I don't think it's only mine, but I don't think it's an unusual opinion to have a recruitment. You have some recruitment right there. But the other part of it is, if in fact you're really trying to do that, and I'm subject to being corrected, if it is that you're not getting 8 hours a day, they are paid minimum wage. Most of them are, but the report also said some are paid under the minimum wage, because you remember there are contractors that are awarded these contracts, right? But if it is what I understand, that they do not get a full day's work, telling me that they work 5 days a week is not really the answer. It's how many hours a day do they work. So if they're not getting a full 8 hours a day, then it brings into question, are you really doing it to pull them out of poverty, or is it that you don't want the numbers to look as bad as they could look? That's just a thought. I don't want to persecute it. I wanted to ask you something which
Before you let me interject a little bit. We have a telephone call coming in. Are you taking calls now?
Yes, and I let Dr. Ram answer. He's the expert, not me.
Okay. Good afternoon, caller. Hello. Good afternoon. Okay. Seems like let's continue. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, and once you call, please refer them to Dr. Ram.
Okay.
I'm actually asking this question. I'm really asking you this. because I didn't understand it, and I just want to be fair about my understanding. Okay, so the central bank has said that in its focus this rounds is really on open market operations, which is really the issuing of bonds, but not so much bonds, but treasury, what do you call it? The shorter term
Yeah, your treasury
treasury
notes.
notes and so on, because what they really want to try to do is to control inflation, which is making too much sense to me, to tell you the truth, because the inflation rate may be 1%, but then be year on year. But if you go back to 2015, you're going to see it's nothing like 1%. But anyhow, you said they're focusing on open market operations and trying to sap up liquidity. What I found very interesting is that they kept the repo rate, which for the I'll let you explain it to people. They said that this year the financial liquidity reduced to 2.6 billion from 7.8 billion last year. Yet they still have the repo rate at 3.5. So the question I'm really asking you, let me get back to the question. The minister, through the central bank, of course, it was issued two bonds recently within a matter of months, right? And the first bond was to pay off a debt that was coming due. And only 2% of the persons who bought the bond were from the local market. Everybody else was from outside. And then just in a matter of months again, he went back out in the market to issue a bond to pay another bond that was maturing within a month time to raise money. So it looked like he raising money to pay debt. I'm doing it twice. And then he did as though it was a good thing. And that he said that Standard & Poor's and all of them, they didn't criticize it. But I have a feeling, I just think I'm asking you, really think you could explain it. Is it not because they think that they have the HSF, because they have that as a guarantee? It's no matter how the consolidated fund messes up, they know if the bond matures that they have. And by the way, the coupon rate or the interest rate for the first one was much lower. This time it was about 3 times, if I could remember, 6 point something percent. So just to see that, I mean, I'm no economist, but just seeing that, it looked like that's not a good thing.
Right. So I haven't looked at it, but just to say, first of all, yeah, governments tend to do this quite often, where they might have some outstanding debt that they need to pay, and they simply sort of rolling over that debt, as it were, by issuing a new debt. Now, it could be that the second bond was for a longer time period, and therefore the coupon on that needed to be higher, because people need to be compensated for.
So they said it was 1 month. It was due in 1 month. The second one.
Oh, the second one. Okay. But the second bond that they did, was it a longer term than the first one
I
that
don't
they
know
did?
how long it was, but they said it was due within a month's time to be paid.
Right. So that is quite a normal thing. But if I get back to what I think eventually we need to discuss this afternoon, is the role of monetary policy in a small island developing state, and by nature what we should expect from our monetary authority. What is appropriate for us in a small island developing state that is very open. We don't make most of the things that we need to consume, and so we need to be able to import. And really, you want to be able to import those things in the most efficient way as possible, so that the man on the street, the person working, can get the best price available. If you think about it, I was just speaking to a friend of mine who recently got married to a Barbadian. He's a Trini, got married to a Barbadian. Was trying to open a business in Barbados, and recently he decided to move back to Trinidad, where he's doing a lot better. And now he's saying, man, he was telling me this morning, he called me, Justin, it doesn't make sense for me to be making my money in Trinidad and then trying to support a family in Barbados because the cost of living is so high there. Yes. So what I'm trying to say is that living in a small island state, your cost of living are considerably more than if you were living in a big economy where you have economies of scale. And what we as policymakers, if we are really serious, we want to try to reduce the cost of living to as low as possible. It will never be as low as in perhaps the United States, but we could try to bring it as low as possible because we also have much lower wages than what people in the United States have to say. So this is just a little bit of a preamble before I go in to speak about monetary authority and appropriate monetary policy for a small island developing state like Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed for any small open economy. I also want to say that my economic philosophy is one that I believe that we need to empower the individual and the household. They are the ones where we should be giving the greatest economic power to allow them to be able to be self-reliant and self-resilient and not having to depend on the state for the basics of day-to-day. There are certain things that I think the state has to provide: good infrastructure, good education, good healthcare, and of course, good security. Right? 4 main things that I think a state needs to provide. Unfortunately, for Trinidad and Tobago, I don't think we're providing any of those to the level that we should be, given the relatively high per capita income that we have. So let me just start off with that preamble. Now, when I look at a central bank in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, you would forgive me for saying this, and I hope the governor of the central bank would forgive me for saying this. I really don't see the point of it. I don't see the point of us needing a central bank for a small island developing state. I think what we do need is a monetary authority. And why do I say that? The central bank, they are tinkering on the sidelines with all sorts of monetary policies that really have no impact on economic activity in Trinidad and Tobago. You just said to me that the governor decided to keep the repo rate at such a rate. He's trying to influence inflation. He has practically no influence on inflation in Trinidad and Tobago. We all know that. Most of that inflation is imported. He can do whatever he wants, but the inflation is mainly imported inflation, right? So I think we need to get away from this notion that we have really great monetary policy in Trinidad and Tobago and that it really provides some fillip for economic activity. It does not, and it is the same in other small island developing states. Hence the reason why I think, and I've come to this conclusion, I would say over the last 2 years, that domestic currencies for a small island developing and an open economy that is really, I know that a lot of people will probably want to curse me, but
I think they have a little bit.
I really don't see the point in it. Now, I understand the idea of sovereignty, and I would say, therefore, if you want to maintain a local currency, then it should be pegged and fully backed by foreign currency at all times. Yes. So that whenever I want to exchange my Trinidad and Tobago dollar for a US dollar or sterling or a pound sterling or a euro note, I will get that almost immediately from the moment I go to the bank. I don't have to have any question because it is fully backed. Now, my preference would be if we were fully dollarized, okay? Where I'm not even having this domestic currency. But in the absence of being fully dollarized, I could live with having a local currency that is fully backed. And in essence, Karen, if you think about it, that is dollarization. And it would mean that we go back to the system of having a currency board situation whereby your money supply is directly related to the amount of foreign exchange that you have. So I cannot have excess TT dollars floating around and not be able to convert that on demand if I needed to. That immediately brings a whole level of confidence to the market. And I'm pretty sure you would start to see a lot more US dollars that Trinidad and Tobago residents and citizens have holding outside, they will start to bring back in. It will also mean that people will start using their access to their own foreign currency to buy the imports that they require. What this then means, Karen, and I think it's very difficult for most people to understand, is that your whole notion of reserves becomes null and void. Now, why have I come to this position? You know, I've done so much work across the Caribbean, other developing countries across the globe. And as you know, I'm speaking to you right now from Turks and Caicos, where we only use the US dollar as our currency. There is nobody here ever talking about, hey, what our reserves are today. You know, nobody ever has to worry about whether I have a currency that will be globally accepted. That's something that is very, very important. So I'm saying to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, you really love your local currency, fine, keep it. But let us move away from the notion of having this quasi floating exchange rate that never really floats. And let us go back to a currency board situation whereby any TT dollar that you hold is formally and always backed by hard currency. So it means that when you go into any Republic Bank to exchange a TT dollar, you can get on demand a US dollar for that if and so when you desire. It would also mean that it brings confidence for people to start bringing back their foreign currency within Trinidad and Tobago. And in fact, if you are holding foreign currency abroad, it automatically becomes part of what you might consider your foreign
The
exchange.
foreign exchange. Okay, let me ask you two things before. I'm going to ask you about de-dollarization, okay, which seems to be picking up some speed on that side. But before I ask you that, because that goes counter. Okay, so two questions I will ask is why do countries want to hold on to having their own currency? Because I remember I lived in Barbados for 4 years. I love Barbados. There's a lot about Barbados that when I say love Barbados, Barbados is a very disciplined country. Huh? Oh my Lord, you think you could have selling thing on the side of the road? That's not happening in Barbados. That not happening. Nobody putting up no thing to sell, nothing on the side of the road. Just doesn't happen. There's a level of discipline in that country that is really very amazing. And it has a lot to do with the fact that they depend a lot on the tourism. So we have to bear things in mind, not just say, we have to be careful about making, coming to conclusions because of that there, and so on.
And the history too. The history too is important. The history, the particular history of Barbados is particularly important.
In what sense you mean?
In the sense that, remember, slavery as we know it was first established in Barbados.
Yeah.
Barbados actually experienced ever the most brutal, whenever slaves revolted, they were dealt with in the most brutal way of any colony that we know. I believe that still remains there. Yes. And Trinidad and Tobago is completely different because I tried to study this when I went to Barbados to live, and I noticed the difference. We in Trinidad and Tobago have a much more free. We have always thought.
Ask me.
True, but I think we need to learn to cultivate that creativity that we have.
And discipline and be more disciplined about it.
Yes, we have certain things that we need to do, but we certainly don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I just wanted to make that point about history as well.
Okay, so I want to go back even to that. So because there's a really organic conversation going on right now, and it's a good conversation. Because, when I was in Barbados for the 4 years teaching at the Faculty of Law, I know I had my preconceptions about Barbadians, okay? And one of the things that really struck me was the extent to which, and when I was at the university, but rather even, so you're talking about the academic, you're talking about the support staff, administrative staff, all levels of staff, everyone, the extent to which they embrace their natural hair. I mean, to some extent, I found there was a sense of it always struck me as a kind of a sort of to me, having this idea about little Barbados, little England, and that sort of preconception. Although I studied as a student, that was many years ago, so I came in there as a lecturer, and nearly everyone had their hair natural and in very senior positions. Whereas in Trinidad, look at that whole confusion, or as Trump would say, confuffle, when some students went to their graduation and they said their hair was not properly, their hair was not acceptable. And I don't think that would have happened. I don't know how. Look, I didn't see from the back. I only saw the back of the young people's thing, but I didn't get the impression it was untidy, and that's something that struck me. The other thing I was always told when I was Barbados, always told this: they will do anything. But you see, one thing, don't ever, ever, you see their dollar, don't ever devalue their dollar. That is like a sacred cow. I don't know to the extent to which this sense of, I don't know, this 2 to 1, I don't know, almost as much as a flag meant to them, that 2 to 1. So that was my experience in Barbados. But I want to go back to asking you, and I'm going to just say this, and then I'm going to ask you, why would you think that there would be so much resistance to doing what you're saying? Because what you're saying on the face of it makes sense. But there is a real strong movement. I know you know Dr. Ram much better than I do. And I really think they are very serious about it, the de-dollarization with BRICS. I mean, the membership has reached from 7, then it went to about a whole 6, and included was Iran among them, and other countries that I don't think America will be too happy about, right? And then they said that they got even about 20-something more countries applying for membership, and then they wanting to set up their own equivalent of an IMF. And the whole thinking, as I understood it, is they wanted to break the power of the American dollar, because after they moved away from the gold standard, America just could print money and could have debt through the roof based on the fact that it was American dollars and that was the currency. They wanted two things. They wanted to have their own equivalent of an IMF so that America could not utilize its power of embargoes and whatever they do in order to break by proxy, a war by proxy, a government with which they were not in favor. And they wanted these countries from Asia and Africa to be able to have their own IMF. They also wanted, and they were doing it and are doing it, trading in each other's currencies. Like if they don't have to use US currency, Brazil and China are trading in each other's currencies, to excluding the US currency, although I know China has trillions of dollars of US dollars. My point being that it appears to me that there is a very concerted effort on the part of Asian countries, whatever differences they may have amongst each other, a very concerted effort to break the power of the US dollar, and they call it de-dollarization. So if that is so, and I don't think they're going to let up, I don't know, you're the expert. If that is so, one, why won't we do what you're saying? Why won't we consider your thing? And why are you saying it's floating dollars is nonsense? And I can understand the argument about the central bank. Have an economic advisory board and you have them giving advice on things like inflation, la di da. But yeah. I understand that. But why would they not take your suggestion on board? Because it seems to make a lot of sense, a lot of sense. But could there also be concern that the de-dollarization movement that seems to be really taking up speed with Africa, Rwanda, they're saying is the number one at one time most progressive and most successful African country, maybe 3 years ago, and there seems to be a concerted effort of these countries to break the U.S. dominance. So to put ourselves in the U.S. dollars, would we not be taking it? I'm just asking. I don't know at all.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very important point. And a lot of these countries, the African, Asian countries, speaking about creating their own currency, is really about geopolitics, right? Because they feel as if America wields the power uh, of within financial services. So if you do something wrong, they can impose sanctions on you, and it's very easy for them to enforce those sanctions because ultimately they know you need to use their financial system to do transactions. So from that point of view, I understand. But the reason I think for us in Trinidad and Tobago and other small economies, we shouldn't be too concerned about that. One, because there is a fact that we live in the Caribbean, which is part of Pax Americana, right?
What's
Now,
that? Pax Americana. Never
yeah,
heard that before.
Pax Americana. You, if
Never heard
you
that.
think, if you think Trinidad, little Trinidad and Tobago can try to step too far out of line with American policy, we'll end up like Cuba, as you know. Okay,
Yeah,
that is a fact.
that's a
And
fact.
if I say something, the Ukrainians have felt the brunt of that. Okay,
Mhm.
there are certain spheres within this globe where you live, which should dictate, if you are smart, how you need to have your certainly your international policies and your diplomacy. You know, unfortunately, and I would say this, Ukraine has paid the price for that in a very, very bad way. Yes, eventually Russia will probably have to pay for their reconstruction. But if you look at it, Ukraine will be totally destroyed by the time you get a peace agreement, which is very, very sad. And so look at Cuba. The moment you try to step out of line, you will find yourself in a situation where you cannot get out of it unless you eventually go back to where the Americans want you to be. Now, I know as small islands, we say we are independent and we are satellites of none, you know, and we have our own
Except the
policy.
Privy Council.
Right. The fact is that not even Venezuela, which is larger than us, can step too far out of line
It's
when it
true.
comes to when you're living in Pax Americana. The
Mhm.
entire Western Hemisphere understands that. And if you are smart, you
Mhm.
will understand that. And you might say things to your people, you know, we are independent and so forth. But when it comes to your economics, you have to be even smarter. So I just want to make that point clear to us. I don't think it makes sense for us to even consider trying to jump on the bandwagon of a new international currency and all that. The only reason that new international currency will be of some value is because China, which will be the biggest holder, biggest person, the biggest country within that conglomeration of countries, has a lot of US currency anyway in reserves. Because ultimately, when you want to buy something from anybody in the world, you know what currency they want?
It's
They want
true.
US dollars.
Absolutely.
So I do not see that hegemony of the US dollar going away anytime soon. Certainly not for the next 100 years or so. So
Okay.
I think for us, it's much better if we were to be aligned and to have our currency. If we want to have a domestic currency, have it pegged to the US dollar, but not only pegged as in Barbados, because Barbados has not done it right. The Eastern Caribbean countries have done it right,
And what
whereby
is that? Mhm.
and they in effect have a currency board. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, as it's called, I don't think it's really a central bank. It's more of a currency board, whereby the EC dollar that is circulating is
Mhm.
almost 100% backed by foreign currency. That is why when you have an EC dollar, you can exchange that so easily anywhere within the Eastern Caribbean currency union, and that's why that currency has maintained its strength and its
Mhm.
confidence. I think that Trinidad and Tobago and indeed Barbados, if they were smart, they would go back to such a monetary authority and regulatory approach to monetary policy. Now, people might think, "Oh my God, Justin, you crazy or what? What are you talking about?" But you know what happens right now, Karen, when you have this domestic currency that we have in Trinidad and Tobago,
Mhm.
and certainly in Barbados, you have a lot of people who are free riding on people who are actually exporting and earning foreign exchange. And if I dare say so, even our financial sector free
What
rides.
is what do you mean by that? What do you mean the free riding? What do you mean by that?
They don't have to think about exporting. They don't have to think about earning hard currency. All they know is that they can go about and spend domestic currency, and they don't have to think about where that foreign exchange is coming from to pay for the eventual things that they are actually purchasing with the domestic currency. Most of the times when you spend a Trinidad and Tobago dollar, I would say at least 70 to 80% of that dollar, so 70 to 80 cents of that TT dollar is going towards purchasing something that is imported. Most people don't even think about it in that way. Now, if you had a currency or if you were using US dollars all the time, immediately you would start to think about it in that way. If the banks were also aware of that, they would also start to think differently about who they lend to. Right now, the banks don't even have to think about foreign exchange. If you think about it, RBC, Scotiabank, CIBC, the other foreign banks that operate, they just are transacting in local currency and then taking their profits out in foreign exchange and lending for the easiest thing, which is based on imports. If they were thinking differently, and if we had hard currency as our currency or a domestic currency that was pegged to the US dollar, then they would start to think twice about what they lend to, because
Mm-hmm.
now they know that the money supply is directly related to
Mm-hmm.
net foreign exchange earnings. So you know what that would do, Karen? If if a bank knows that if I lend money, that I need to ensure that who I'm lending money to is a net producer of foreign exchange, or at least not draining foreign exchange. Immediately you start to think about lending for productive activities, and not
Mm-hmm.
and not for the non-productive activities, like, for example, buying a car or some other imported.
But I can think of other things. I mean, people need a car, but the franchises, that's my number one thing. That
Yes,
that
yes,
doesn't help
yeah,
with our health, and
right,
it puts up our bill with diabetes, non-communicable diseases. I cannot understand it. And they don't pay well.
yeah.
I just do not understand it. You know.
Right. And
Mm.
so this is why I'm saying the monetary system that we have is so important to actually change the incentives within the economy. And I would say this as well, that
Mm.
if we stop having a central bank doing what a central bank, a real central bank is supposed to be a lender of last resort.
Mhm.
If you move towards a system where you have domestic currency that is fully backed by hard currency, or if you're using the US dollar, then the central bank really does no longer become a lender of last resort. It forces now commercial banks to then develop lines of credit with international banks. So it
Mm.
then it then automatically pushes them to also start thinking about foreign exchange, because they no longer need to have a lender of last resort that could only lend them $50. That makes no sense for them. So
Mm.
Republic Bank, Scotiabank will now have lines of credit with international banks, perhaps in the US and so forth. So if they get into any difficulty, they can draw on those lines of credit. And therefore, what we then have is that we have shifted the incentives of the commercial banking system to stop only focusing on making money on franchises or
Retail, retail,
on,
retail.
on retail. And now
Mm.
you encourage them to also start thinking about how important it is for them to have the linkages to international markets, not only for people to import, but for their own well-being if ever they were to get into difficulties, as it were. I'm
That's
just
a hard
thinking
sell, huh? That's a hard sell.
it is a very, very hard sell, but I
I'm
see
not
it
saying
is
I'm not
working.
saying it's not doable, because
Hmm.
a lot of it is emotive, and part of the thing is I'm going to ask you about the energy sector and which
Hmm.
and the report just now. But why, and even for Trinidad, you made the point that about Barbados, how many years? Maybe 500 years of slavery. Actually, when the family of that former Prime Minister of England, his family went to Ghana to apologize, Of course, they asked him where the money, right? Because apparently what they used to do there also was if a slave tried to run away to make an example, they would cut off the heads of slaves and put it on posts along the streets so people would see what they did. And I went and I found this very curious that I never thought of this way. As you had mentioned, is slavery. Two things. Again, we have an organic discussion. It's not entirely economics because I'm really going to ask you about the energy and RPU just now, the energy sector. But I went to the famous new museum they have in Washington, D.C., because I had to go up there for Christmas for whatever reason. And for the first time, I read, they said that slavery, while we've had slavery all along, hundreds of years, because a lot of times people will tell you slavery is nothing new, you're doing as if it's just African people experienced it. But they said for the first time ever in the history of the world, or in history, that a human being was treated as a commodity as you would treat gold. In other words, you could be a slave in other countries, whether they build the pyramids or whatever. You couldn't escape capture. You had to do what you had to do, but they never didn't recognize your humanity. But for the first time, you were actually looked at and treated as a commodity. That really struck me. Another thing, coming back to what you said, again, you talked about how long Barbados had slavery for how many years, right? And I remember, I think it was Besson who died a few years ago. You know, Mr. Besson, who was a history writer and so on. But it wasn't he that I spoke to, but I knew the family, but it was someone who knew him and said to me, he says, Karen, and this person said to me, Karen, you don't understand something about Trinidad. We at the tail end of the slavery, you know. By the time they brought slavery to Trinidad, slavery was nearly over, you know. Right? They had gone through Cuba, gone through Antigua, St. Kitts, Nevis, or they had to almost be begging people from the other islands, like Grenada and so on, to come because the slavery was almost not unknown in Trinidad. And I think it has a lot to do with our psyche.
Yes.
And then on top of which I'm sure you know, but maybe for the listeners, if they don't know and should be proud of that, but because there are books on it and they can look it up. And they talked about it at the museum I went to. They talked about the Americans, which were the black slaves, obviously the black slaves, the slaves who fought alongside the British during the Civil War against United States because they wanted their independence. By the way, what is curious to me, when France has Bastille Day, they celebrated. They fought tooth and nail with guns and ammunition, and they celebrated. When America fought for their war of independence, it's a great honor. When we do it, no. You must not do that. But in any event, the Americans, you know about the Americans, right?
Yes.
Right. So when they were promised that if they joined with the British against the Americans, that they would not only give them their freedom, but give them land. Some of them went to Newfoundland in Canada. Some of them went to Sierra Leone. So there's a lot of Creole. There are a lot of American roots in Sierra Leone. Right. Some of them went to Bermuda, but to work as longshoremen, but they were not given the land. So they wrote to the governor and said, you promised us that if we did this, you're lost, yes, but you promised us that you'd give us land. They said, okay then. We sent him a Ruga. He died on the island because slavery was still there was still slavery. So they don't want them to infect the slaves. So it's okay. We send you on the eastern side up in Maruga in the forest. Yes. And we get the day to live. Stay over there, huh? And which is, of course, the story about Papa. I remember that story that V.S. Naipaul wrote about these people who would come to see the thing. So the point is, and that's why you have Company 1, Company 2, New Grant. I don't know if Trinidadians know that. So the reason I'm saying that attitude, I think, that we have, or this freeness, that we really don't understand slavery. We don't really understand somebody telling us what we have to do. All I'm
Yes.
saying is, in America, they didn't get slavery, wasn't abolished until 1868. It's abolished in Trinidad in 1834. I think they tried an apprenticeship period for 1838. My
Right.
grandfather, no, I always want to say that my grandfather died in 1970 or thereabouts, just to be clear. And he
Right.
was 98 at the time, just to be clear. But he was born in 1876. So
Yes.
I don't even have how much generation. So I'm sure you can repeat that over and over again. The point I'm making is that there's a freeness about us as Trinidadian and Tobagonians, especially Trinis, because we have a different history, I think, that we have this attitude towards life of not being confined by any so-called master. And by the way, when
Mm-hmm.
when these people got their when slavery was abolished, every slave owner was got compensated for losing their labor. They got land and they got money. But when we say give us reparations for building up all your cities, you can't understand. They're not making no sense to you, but it make plenty sense to you that you should get down the islands. I don't mean any offense to anybody, yeah, because a lot of my friends, it has nothing to do with anybody. I'm just history, and people have to understand that's history. Okay, it's not
Yes, of course.
offending anybody, right? I'm
Yeah.
just
That's
saying
the
is that
facts.
right. And if it is you understood that you should get paid back for losing your commodity, right? And get land and money for that. Why you can't understand we shouldn't get reparations? I can't understand it. That is not making sense. That went completely off the point to
Yes.
ask you about started with the unemployment, which is really I find the central bank governor. I know he got it from the CSO and all of that, but I just would say I won't say too much on that. But there's also the issue of how inflation now, because what they're talking now is that all this money, the minimum wage being increased, the money that they paid out, although some teachers said they didn't get money, but I guess they eventually get the money. All this money being dispensed, isn't that going to then really feed an inflationary trend in the country, and where salaries have not increased and there's been high retrenchment and the dollar just not going where it used to go 3 years ago, but you're paying more for basic things in that basket. And to support that, let me just say this, which I got from the central bank. So I am
Mm-hmm.
picking it up, the central bank. They said that, and this is it, economic activities expected, hear the word, expected to benefit from the upstream projects coming on board. You talk about Dragonfield and Manatee. Don't hold your breath too
All
much for
right.
that, right? He
Yes.
also said he talked about the consumer price decreased over the first 10 months of 2023 by 35.2, crude oil by 20.1, that's Brent, for West Texas 19.5, and Henry Hub 61.1%. Natural gas from $6.57 per MMBTU to now to $2.52 in the first 10 months of 2023. So I cannot, and then he also said that the energy upstream is a lower output in the second quarter of 2023. There's a major decline in LNG. There's a sharp fall in LNG liquid by 35%. He said the petrochemicals reduced their output for fertilizers, ammonia, and urea, again because of shortage of natural gas. Continued contraction in the energy sector predicted. And what it seems to be banking is on the manufacturing sector. So I can't understand. All that seemed like, I don't know, like something not adding up to me. So I'm leaving it up to you to explain it to the viewers.
Well, unfortunately, central bankers are not really development economists or development practitioners. I'll say that first of all. They don't quite get what is development and what are the really important factors in development. So these headline macroeconomic indicators might sound good to them, but we all know when we dig a little bit deeper, they really don't make much difference to demand on much difference to the man on the street. That's just the bare reality of it. So when, for example, you could have someone speaking about you expect economic activity in the upstream sectors to benefit. I mean, we have enough data and we have enough facts, as it were, to tell us that, come on, we all know that this is always going to be fleeting. And eventually what then happens is that you hope that you'll have some increase in the production of natural resources. And based on that, the government will get some revenue, and then the government will then decide who to sell those rents to. I like to use the word sell because ultimately that is what, unfortunately, that is what.
When you say rents, for the man in the street to understand.
So the rents are what you call your revenues associated with the exploitation of your natural resources. In economics, we call them rents because it's really a factor of the revenues that the oil companies get, and then they minus what we call their costs, and we normally call those profits rents. And the government then gets a share of those profits based on how well they negotiated the terms of the deal with the companies that are exploiting those natural resources. And so we all know that, eventually the government will get some revenue and they will spend.
Look how bad those figures are. I just read out some figures that are really, really, really bad.
Yes, and look, and we have been dealing with this type of economic model since before independence, since during colonial days, and we all can see what the outcome has been. You do get some economic benefits in the short term, things improve, but longer term it's not sustainable. And in fact, if you're not careful, you then go into a state of stagnation and what many economists tend to term the middle income trap. We have been sort of trapped at this per capita income level, I would say, for the last 10 years or so. And we're not going anywhere. And so if the governor of the central bank, and this is nothing personal towards him.
No, not at all.
This is nothing personal.
He has to take instructions from the minister, by the way, in the legislation.
Right. I'm not, and this is nothing personal, but
yes.
really, and I guess it comes back to my point as to why I don't think we need a central bank. What we really do need are people who are real development practitioners, who can look at the data, who can look at our economy and say, okay, these are the things that we need to do. So when you think about it, what Trinidad and Tobago needs to do is this word that we've been hearing for so long.
Diversification.
Yeah, diversification.
Don't let the Prime Minister hear you say that word,
I will use that cuss word here.
I think he's getting used to it. A foreign exchange earnings.
Right.
Foreign exchange earnings. I think he will be more palatable to him. But
and it is why I would say that the greatest hindrance to true diversification, because the type of diversification we need requires a different type of investment, is of course the high crime rate. That is the greatest hindrance to our really ability to diversify, because foreign direct investment and investment into oil and natural gas is not really dependent on crime, if you think about it.
No.
I will put my money in, I'm drilling offshore, that really has nothing to do with me. I will then pay you monies and you do what you want to do with it. But to truly diversify means actually investing on land and on land activities, and then having people actually work on land here within the country. Now, truth be told, I will give some props to the government for opening up the Phoenix Park. What was it that they recently opened it last week? I think it's an enterprise zone. I think that's a good thing. But now, if you want to attract investment into that, they've already attracted some investment. You're not going to attract many people to invest there if the crime rate is where it is, because why would I want to invest here and I feel as if my life and limb is possibly at risk here in Trinidad and Tobago? And so for me, the greatest hindrance, if you really are serious about diversification, you need to do something about that high crime rate. And then of course you have to deal with your doing business environment, do with your tax rates. And of course, Karen, I really get upset when I think about it. we're really not doing a great disservice within our education system. I tend to refer to our education system as, if I spell it out for you, EDU, so edu, CA, and SHUN, because we really are shunning the majority of the people who go into our
I
education
thought I was
system.
a new spelling. I thought you were
It's
trying to say us. I thought you were trying to tell us we get so bad we can't even spell education.
No, no, no. What I'm saying is that
I
across the
understood what you said.
Caribbean, too many of our people are going into the education system and coming out with really not proper education. We actually shunning them. And so we have this system that I call the education system. And we have to think about how we reform that so that we get a system whereby everybody gets good access to quality education, and not only those who have passed the common entrance exam and have
That's true.
gone into
Mhm.
a secondary school
That
that
is
is
very
run by
true.
one of the denominational
Very true.
authorities.
So
We have
what do you
to
think of
really
the
form that.
idea? What do you think of the idea that's been floated about? Why don't you let the denominational boards run the schools and the government give them that? Because the government schools are not doing well. I mean, all in all, you look at the denominational schools of whatever religious persuasion they may be, they seem to have the discipline and they seem to be able to get the results. And if that is kind of like a maybe a quick fix, something like the Concordat that caused a lot of kind of thing when it happened, maybe that's something, someone had made that thing. When they said it to me at first, I said, oh, that's on. But when you think about it, maybe that might be one of the answers. Because just by the way, when I was living in the East, that school, that Hindu school, doing so well. Oh gosh,
Is it Hillview?
no, Hillview is Presbyterian.
Oh,
Um, no, it was no, by it's run by the Sanata Dharma board. At the
oh
time,
yes.
you
Hmm.
know what right. At the time when my daughter was going to primary school, they didn't even have a Form 5, right? But they were so determined. That's one of the top schools in Trinidad now,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know?
Yes, yes.
So
No, I think it can be emulated without actually being religious, as it were.
right.
There are other examples that we can use so that so my kids actually live in the UK, um,
Okay.
and they both went to what's called academies,
Okay.
which are in effect non-religious but are
Right.
run like a denominational schools,
Right.
whereby you have a board made up of teachers, the principal, but also of parents as
But the
well.
same concept then.
The same
Blueprint.
concept. They came the
Same
same the
blueprint.
same the same
Yeah.
concept, because um you know I mean, religion is good, but it also
Yeah, but
has some
it's also
negatives.
very divisive too, huh?
Yeah,
And
exactly,
controversial.
exactly.
It is, it is, it is.
And I'm quite secular in my own thinking, but
Yes,
but
yeah.
I
And nothing's wrong with that, and that
yes,
is a very good point.
yeah, and I
Mm.
think we really try to move away from that, and so I think it can be emulated in another way if we move towards that sort of academy approach, or charter schools as they might call them in
Yeah,
the
they have them in the States.
in the states. Hmm.
Let me ask you then, shifting again because we are limited time, and I want to use the time that I have still have you with me. The RPU, why is it still 3.50 if everything is honky? Because then they look at the Fed rate is 5.50, the interest rate. Um, and of course, that encourages people to do exactly what you said, not bring the money back, and keep their money outside the country. So if everything is doing so well, I just gave you the energy sector figures, and we are energy economy. So I can't understand how you could say that. I find it just mind-boggling. But anyway, be that as it may, how come, which is the repo rate that you could explain, why has it still stuck at 3.50, and what does it mean, and why is it still there if things are, you know, doing all right, and you are so afraid of, understandably, of the hemorrhaging of our US currency. When people take it out, they're not bringing it back because they're getting a much higher interest rate outside. So if you could Explain how
Yes.
that works and how it's why is it still so? How they could
Well,
justify it. I
well,
guess.
that I think is a lot more further, as it were, an ammunition for my whole argument as to why we need to move away from this domestic currency that we have, because we should really be in a situation whereby, Karen, you know that most people who are holding foreign exchange, that Trinis who live in Trinidad or residents in Trinidad, if they hold in foreign exchange, they're more than likely holding it in a bank in the United States of America. Yes,
That is very true, you know.
that is a fact. That is a
It's
fact.
a fact. They're so afraid to have it here. That
They
is
are
very
very afraid to have it here. So, but if you had a situation where your
not that we
current
encouraging that, huh? Because not
no,
that we know, but it is what it
no,
is true.
it is what it is, and you come to make good policy if you base it on facts, right?
Mhm.
You can't make policy and hide from the facts. The facts are that those are the facts, and so you need to have a monetary policy that understands that and is more aligned with where you know your people are going to put their money to get a rate of return. So it doesn't make sense for Trinidad to be able to have an interest rate that is less than what people can receive for those same US dollars outside, and in particularly in the United States of America, where they know their money is very safe. You would save your money in the United States if you had the
And
opportunity to
that's
do that.
understandable. That's
And that's
understandable.
understandable.
And maybe
So,
it may not be nice, it may not be thing. Just to make sure people understand, the
mhm,
repo rate is the rate that the central bank sets, which is a signal to the commercial banks, the interest rates that they should charge to the commercial lender.
right.
Because and the idea being that the higher the repo rate, the more you have your more you're going to have to pay by way of interest payments, and therefore that's a way of controlling liquidity, too much money in the system, as I understand it. But I want to ask you something too. So, yeah, it was suppose all what you're saying to me is what what you're saying to me is that we are not doing a very good job, and I'm just saying we as a government, it just seems so. This is something I do not understand clearly, and if you can explain it,
Hmm.
where the difference is, that and the manufacturing. Because one of the things they did say was that the manufacturing non-energy sector, and I know manufacturing also includes energy, but they took out the non-energy part, okay?
Hmm.
And they have limited it to the what do you call the manufacturing sector, which is the petrochemicals. No, they've taken out the petrochemicals. So they've
Hmm.
done construction, restaurants, agriculture, the agro industry, and so on.
Hmm.
So the definitely the bank is reporting, and the data does support it from what we're given, that the manufacturing sector is doing much better than it did before. So that goes to the issue of two things. If you have time, and I'm going to leave you to talk on it both. The argument of devaluation, where people say the reason why people say we shouldn't devalue, if the manufacturing sector is doing well, shouldn't the devaluation make our whatever we're producing even more attractive to the to potential purchasers? So that's that. And then the balance of payment and balance of trade. I mean, are they the same thing or not the same thing?
Hmm.
And so those are the questions. And finally, because I'm gonna let you talk out the rest of the show. They did say that the concern is with inflation increasing. Now you're saying year on year. You know what I mean? Year on year, the economy contracted 20% according to IMF by 2023. But if you want to do year on year, it might be 2%. In any event, in the report it did mention things might change if water rates go up, because that's the manufacturing sector use a lot of water, electricity, property tax. Well, they're not using it for commercial as yet, but
Hmm.
property tax, water rates, electricity rates, and of course the minimum wage going up. So how does that impact on an economy that seems to be struggling. You're struggling because you're dependent on energy. And I'm going to ask you one last thing. I hope you remember these things I'm asking you. I hope you're writing it down. They
Hmm.
made a big to do about the license. But what does the license mean if Biden says you can't build the pipeline? And Mr. Madero say, look, I have one the Guerrera pipeline for LNG, taking LNG on to Venezuela. Let us build one, and we will export the LNG from Venezuela to Atlantic LNG or wherever. No, nobody falling for that one. They're taking that chance. So balance of payments, balance of trade, the
Hmm.
effect of all of these changes on inflation rates, especially when salaries have not going on, and all this wishful thinking about energy when we don't have natural gas. And what does a license mean without? What is the license mean? Maybe I misunderstood something about
Hmm.
that license, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I didn't understand what was the big to do without the ability to bring the gas here.
Right.
So
Well,
please
okay.
explain.
So you have a lot to speak about. In fact, so when you first started, you were speaking about the valuation and the manufacturing sector. Well, let me just say, to be consistent with my arguments earlier around what type of monetary policy we need, which is one that is based on a currency board and one that is pegged. It means, therefore, I really don't agree with any devaluation. It doesn't really assist us. It tends to drive higher inflation, and ultimately it means that your people need to start working double as hard to earn the same amount, because ultimately about 70 to 80% of what they buy is still going to be imported, right?
Right.
So I would say that now, if it is that Trinidad and Tobago was committed to having a domestic currency as we have now, then the only benefit of that is to say, okay, you're going on the value and you try to get competitiveness advantages out of that. But I just don't think that that's the way to go. There are other ways for a small island developing state that is open economy wise to focus on other factors of production that actually drive real competitiveness, and not one that is based on just a nominal change in the value of your currency. So I believe we shouldn't be devaluing. We should have a currency that is pegged, but focus on the other areas that really drive productivity. We spoke a little bit briefly around our education. That is critical. I don't think that people quite understand the overall economic importance of having everyone coming out of secondary school, and preferably coming out of tertiary education with a very good education. Because once you have that, that drives a lot of additional economic activity for you. It then makes people think about entrepreneurial activities, and you do all of this. And of course, that is necessary but insufficient, because you have to also have the right business environment for that. So that right now it's still very difficult for you to do any sort of business in Trinidad and Tobago, if you want to start from scratch. Yes. And so these are the areas that I think we need to reform adequately: education and a good business environment. And that then leads to a reinforcing what we would call virtuous circle, that then encourages people to say, you know what, if I get a good education, the possibility of me being able to get into entrepreneurial activity or to get a good job at the end of it means that it reinforces my, I guess, incentive to stay in education. Yes. And that has been proven through statistics and studies that have been done in other countries, that if you know that you can get a good job after staying in education, you will stay in education, because you know that you can utilize those skills that you have earned through your attendance at school or university to then give you what I would say are good, tangible benefits, meaning income and a good quality of life afterwards. If you don't have that, then what's the incentive of staying in education? Huh? If you think about it, Karen. So these are reinforcing things that we have to do, and this is not Justin Ram saying it. This has been shown by really good economists and sociologists, um, in Europe, in North America, that those are really important. So that, for example, the Chinese have understood this, you tend to make your schools even more attractive than a shopping mall, if you think about it. So people want to go to school because I love it there. And whenever I visit my kids in the UK and I go to their schools, the schools are magnificent. And these are public schools. Yeah? And I say, wow, I wish I went to school in a place like this. It's so fantastic. I would want to. I used to love going to school, but I don't think I might want to go home if I went, if I went to school like that. And then I know that there's such a dynamic labor market out there that I would be so enthusiastic about learning. Now, of course, there'll always be some people who would not want to, and you have to.
That's the 5%.
That's the 5%, but there are policies for to deal with that, right? But that's another matter that we don't have time to speak about. But anyway, let's just get back to the points that you wanted me to speak about here. So balance of payment versus balance of trade. When you speak about balance of trade, you're already talking about, okay, what have I produced and I'm selling to the rest of the world, and then what do I need to import to satisfy my own consumption needs at home? And that then gives you an idea of your balance of trade. But your balance of payments takes into account more than that. Yes, because you can have people remitting, so remittances, for example. You can have, for example, what we call as capital receipts. So you might have, for example, a government selling some asset and a foreign entity buying that and therefore paying you in foreign currency. And that will have an impact on what you call your balance of payments. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So what tends to happen is that we speak about something called the current account, which really focuses on your balance of trade. Yes. Which says to you, okay, this is how much you're producing and how much you're selling. And you'll find that a lot of economies can tend to have negative current accounts when it comes to balance of trade, because they're not really producing as much as they should in order to import as much as they need to consume. But then they have the capital account in the balance of payments, which then tends to also compensate for any negatives on the balance of trade. So when you
have something to sell,
yeah, if you have something to sell, right, it is true. And so balance of payments are really made up of your current account and your capital accounts together, right? So it's important that your audience members understand that. And as we on this topic, I think when you live in a small open economy like ours, a basic economics course should be a prerequisite for anybody before they come out of secondary school, because people really need to understand how our economies work.
I agree with that.
And to be cognizant of, what, when I go to shop, do I buy that Uncle Ben's rice, or I buy that rice that is produced perhaps?
But when I listen to Parliament, why nobody heaven's name they're talking about?
Exactly. No, nobody can pull wool over your eyes,
Yeah.
So that's really, really important. Now, coming to the other point around what I would consider the things that you were speaking about, inflation drivers at home, your property taxes, perhaps if you were to reduce your subsidies on utilities, those things increasing. Now, if you think about it, our utility rates are really cheap compared to international standards. And perhaps we are very fortunate that no one has taken us to the World Trade Organization to say
unfair competition.
Unfair competition.
They can't tell us that. We give them many examples of unfair competition in their countries. So leave us alone.
Exactly.
But I know what you mean.
But the point is here, okay, eventually we're going to have to raise the prices and costs associated with these things, because we're not going to be able to subsidize them for time immemorial, right? We're going to have to raise the prices of these things because, one, we just don't have the money to keep subsidizing, and two, whatever resource you're utilizing in the economy, the price tends to dictate to you how best to use that resource. So whenever I visit Trinidad and Tobago, I can go to somebody's office or perhaps somebody's home and the AC is running nonstop. Why is that? Because
True.
the cost of electricity is so low. And if you think about it, you're using natural gas because all electricity is generated in Trinidad and Tobago via
True
natural
natural
gas.
gas.
That's a lot of natural gas that you could be
Yes.
using in other value added activities rather than just simply cooling a home. And so
Okay,
there
let
are a
me
lot.
ask you something very quickly. Now, I'm sorry to cut you, but I
Mhm.
don't want to lose this. You know, when we talk about productivity in this country, you know, we always put the focus, and I'm not saying it should not be on the worker also. And I think, all due respect to Industrial Relations Act and the Industrial Court, understood why, but sometimes you need to do a little. It had its time after the ISA. You need to look and see whether it's being counterproductive. But to some extent, don't you think that the manufacturers themselves have to take some responsibility, in my view, for our productivity levels, in the sense that they themselves are running the air condition 24/7, and running the water how they want, because at the end of the day, their bill for that is nothing compared to Barbados or Antigua. So don't you think it's always seen as is the worker alone? I'm not saying the worker does not have, and then crime, of course, a big part. But what I'm trying to say is always the focus is the workers you want to produce. But can't you? I read it somewhere actually. But there's also a lack of productivity on the owner. And when you have things like water and electricity being so cheap, you mean it does not itself put some onus on them too to take responsibility?
Well, of course, I mean, but economics is like the fundamental law of physics, which means that
Well, you got to be
things,
lost right there.
yeah, well, which means that people will always take the path of least resistance.
Yes, yes.
Now, if you can get electricity so cheap and water so cheap, you don't really have any incentive to make that a very important part of your production function,
Yeah.
because that's practically zero to you. And this is why prices are, we always as economists say prices are so important, to
Mm,
signal to you that, you know what, I need to conserve, I need to cut back here, I need to improve my productivity.
mm.
So the moment you raise the price of water, you raise the price of electricity, you will immediately see a
Price
change in
increase.
behavior.
Oh,
And that is why, for most countries around the world, you have seen, when you look at manufacturing or energy use per $1 of economic activity, that has been going down. Countries have becoming a
okay.
lot more productive. That,
Mm.
that I can't really say that that has been the case in Trinidad and Tobago, because we practically
No
pivot.
incentive.
There are no incentives. So prices are really, really, really important. And I think we need to understand that. And furthermore, we tend to waste our natural resources, because you can go into somebody's home right now. I bet you there's a leak in somebody's home in Trinidad and Tobago, and they don't really have any incentive to
You
fix it.
must be coming to my house or what?
Yeah.
I'm joking. I don't have any leak. I don't have any leak. I'm
No,
joking.
no,
I'm
no.
joking.
But the moment you put a meter on
Yeah,
that,
it's true. It's true.
yeah, you will see people,
It's
because
absolutely true.
right now, I can go into somebody's home in Trinidad, and I will
Absolutely
see
true.
a tap running, because they pay a flat rate for that, and that
It's
certainly.
very true. And in fact, I could tell you, as you're on that, I don't want to say who it is because it didn't give me permission to say it. But when they were looking at WASA and what had to be done, what they found out is, you had a line taking, and however far down the line is where you're getting water. And
Mhm.
a lot of times, why people didn't get water lower down the line, because people had water tanks that they weren't fixing, and were just pouring water, and a loss of waste because it didn't matter to them. It
Matter.
didn't matter to them. And so somebody at the end of the line got no water. And what it was said was that it was deliberately, in some cases, left like that because there were people who own water tanks. Remember, when you go and ring WASA and say you have no water, they send in a water truck. You saying it's free, but it's not free because WASA has to pay the owner of that truck who went
Right.
to WASA, wherever, to get water. And some
Exactly.
of them invest in about 10 trucks allegedly, because
Mhm.
it is also a business. So
Right.
it's not just the work, it's the whole darn system. And one thing I have to say to you. You said, and I agreed, but I'm going to pull it back a little because you said, in fact, last time you did mention this because you said you came from, I think, Marabella, and your
Mhm.
father was a cartographer, and I said, let people know what you mean by that, huh? he's, he's drawn maps. You have to be real good at that.
Yeah, yeah.
But you told me that when they closed down Petrotrin, which you didn't agree with, and we don't have time for that. He said it shut down Marabella. So it's not really true to say that the impact of the petrochemical or the gas thing has a limited impact on employment because the banks closed, the restaurants closed, the little entrance, so and then Marapella was turned into a ghost town. So
Mhm.
whilst they may not be directly involved in the energy sector, if the energy sector is not doing well, then
Mhm.
the rest of the economy is impacted by that in a very serious way. And I think you
Yeah.
had said that last time when you were here. I remember what you said,
Right.
Dr. Ram. So
Right.
don't put me to any test, huh?
Yeah, yeah. You remember well. You remember well.
No, because you said so many. That's why I wanted you back on the show because I found you were a wealth of knowledge. I mean, you made me ready. That LNG thing, for one. I mean, I didn't even. I mean, okay, maybe it's foolish on my part, but I didn't. I really never thought about that. And the other point you made about, of course, explaining purchasing power parity was
Mhm.
very helpful. So
Mhm.
you really were very good. Is there something that we forgot? Because we have 5 more minutes and it's yours.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll just sort of sum up and say a few things. I think you know, maybe until next time I come back on the show, we could discuss some other things. But I think that the time has come for Trinidad and Tobago to really examine where we want to go. I think we do need visionary leadership, and that I think requires us taking a change of economic direction. Um, we don't need to depend on oil and gas to be a dynamic economy. Every time I visit Trinidad, and I was there actually only a few weeks ago, early in January. Um, and I'm always amazed at the dynamism of our people, and the creativity of our people. And if we find a way to really tap into that, Trinidad and Tobago can become a real powerhouse economically once more. But I think right now we're sort of stuck in this notion that we think we have to depend on oil and gas. And if you think about it, the most dynamic economies in this world do not depend on that at all. They depend on the innate ability of their people, and how you harness that is going to be critical for us. But I think that, however, there are some real other policy reforms that are required. We need to get to terms, at the grips with crime. Monetary policy, I've said everything I need to say on that today, which I think needs to change because there are certain incentives in the current arrangement that make no sense for us if we want to really change direction. Fiscal policy as well, we've never really spoken too much at length about that, but there are reforms that are required there. And I would say that one last thing here, Karen, that we've never really touched on is that I think we need a new social contract,
Yeah.
meaning that eventually, and when
Not
I
Hobbes, Rousseau's own, right?
yeah, yeah, and even going beyond, because we have spoken about slavery here. There's a book that I'm currently reading called The Racial Contract, which we need to be cognizant of. We need to break some of those tendencies that we still have within society to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to make the most of themselves. And so, therefore, governance reform and constitutional reform, the time for just paying lip service to those have gone. We
Yeah.
really need leadership that is committed to that to give everybody a fighting chance.
Do
And
you
I say
know?
this. Mhm.
No, because as you're talking about fiscal, and I think you said we talked about a monetary policy, we didn't talk about fiscal, but my understanding is that I think Bahamas and another, I don't know if they passed the law, but there are jurisdictions that have actually passed legislation that you have a board that
Mhm.
deals with fiscal advisory, and so that you can't, and it goes to Parliament. And they are there like gatekeepers, so to speak, in relation to inflation, debt to GDP, and all those sort of things. And you can't ignore them. Like what happened here when they had
Right.
the Economic Advisory Board, and in less than a year, it collapsed. And,
Right.
and no one could do anything about it because there was no legislative um, um, backing for it. So I
Right.
think what you're saying is that we need something which other countries have already, I understand, implemented.
Yes, yeah. We need a fiscal responsibility board, as it were, or agency that gives oversight that can then look at government spending arrangements and report back to the people and say, you know what, this isn't good. This has taken us way off where we need to be, or it is in line with what we want. And so the government needs to adhere to that. And you do need an independent body to do that, unfortunately. You know?
Well, it's a
But
small country. Let's be, let's just say that one of the challenges will be it's a small country and it's not a homogeneous country. So
no,
there are challenges on two accounts. So, I
yeah,
always try to be fair and, not say that there aren't challenges because whether you are there or not, if you were there, you would say, "Well, listen, you think it easy to run a country where half is on one and half is the other, and then you're small, and as you say, we are open economy." So you have been so fantastic. It's 6:01,
thank
and
you.
Justin Ram, I love having you on, and I'm
Thank you.
glad I heard you say that next time. So
Yes.
we will have a next time, I hope,
Yes.
and because I think
Yes.
you bring so much to the table, and I know people are listening. People who should be listening are listening, and hopefully, if they're listening, which I believe they are, I hope that they will take on board some of the suggestions that have come out of our discourse this afternoon. And thank you very
Okay.
much for joining us this evening.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I should also say the monetary policy reforms will also bring fiscal discipline. Huh? So let me
Yeah,
just say that.
yes.
Yes.
Final word.
Final word. All right. So thank you
Okay,
so much
all
for
right.
having me. Have a
And
great
thank you
evening.
for coming
Okay.
again, once again.
Thank,
Okay,
thank
David,
you, Mr.
we
Terra.
are
Thank you so much.
6:01. I know I don't get in trouble, so I know I
No,
have to
no,
go.
no. Okay. Thank you so very much, Dr. Ram, Dr. Justin Ram, and thank
Thank
you,
you.
Karen. Fantastic information, and I'm sure
Yeah,
it's very usable across the board. So until next
thank
time,
you. Okay, take care. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening. Bye
Okay.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
bye
Bye-bye.
bye. That's it for today's edition of Hard Talk with Karen Nunez, Tesheira, and her special guest,